This program is brought to you by Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/zombiepopcorn for a free audiobook and a free 30-day trial. Well, welcome back. As always, I am Matt, and with me all the way across the table is my co-host Jason.
Hello.
And then also is Jason's camera sharer.
You know, if I don't edit it that way, you're just going to look really weird.
For those of you who don't realize, I can move into Jason's camera at will. Hey.
Anyway. For those, since we're talking about camera positions, and you may have noticed that Matt is in a new position because a lot of you complained to Matt about me sitting in front of the black and him sitting in front of the color. So we switched it to change it up.
It's true.
For you.
I think I make it look better. Anyway, some of you have complained that Jason has been kind of docile, and a good chunk, and it's true, and I would agree, a lot of what we've done thus far has been largely faith-centered, I guess, my side of the table centered, and some have even said Jason has been too nice.
Some people have said that.
So we have had the conversation, and tonight we are going to find out what Jason really thinks and what he's really passionate about.
Well, it's funny that you would position the start of the show like that, because that is not how you positioned it when you presented it to me.
Oh.
Because, well, let's just do your questions, and we'll see. Let the listeners decide.
Well, first off, we've talked a lot about me being a person of faith and me explaining where a person of faith may come from. In terms of how they deal with issues of social injustice. And one of the things we hyped when we first started the show was the fact that Jason is the atheist side of the discussion, but he is also an anarchist. And I'm kind of curious, specifically, what does that bring to the discussion? What does it mean to be an anarchist? What does it mean for you personally to be an anarchist?
Well, before we get into this, I want it to be known, personal philosophies, personal worldviews of personal philosophies. I don't see any purpose of talking about what we believe in terms of how we should see the world, because we can talk all day about what we believe in, and it doesn't change anything. We have to have the action behind there. So talking about why I'm an atheist and talking about why I'm an anarchist, I don't feel that it actually plays well into the show. I don't think it plays well into the theme of the show. I mean, it would be this. I wouldn't even think it would be in the interest of the show for us to sit down and talk about why you're a Christian, or talk about why you believe in Jesus and why you don't believe in other things, because it doesn't address the fact of why we created this show. We created this show because we have different worldviews, and us talking about our different worldviews gives us a better understanding who we are as individuals, but it doesn't give us a better understanding how to solve the world's problems. It just makes us be able to like each other a little more than what, stereotypical that we're supposed to.
No, I don't like you.
Yeah, that's fine.
We hate each other.
But so with that said, I have been struggling with the topic of this show since we talked about it, doing this, because I'd rather talk about the deep issues than talk about my philosophical beliefs, because the only thing that's going to come from that is somebody out there will say, "Oh, I agree with that," or somebody's going to say, "Oh, that that's horrible. That dude, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't agree with that. And it adds more argument about who I am or who you are versus what are we going to do to solve these problems. Well, so with that said, I mean, we'll have the show, but I just don't want the whole show to be that.
No, not at all.
So when you say that I am an anarchist, that I believe in anarchy, or that does not, putting that label on me does not describe who I am. It does not tell you who I am. It doesn't even give a definition of that person. It actually tells you more my worldview than it does who I am. It doesn't tell you what I do, who I help, who I don't help. You know, it just kind of gives you a worldview. And a lot of people, and it's I have another podcast that talks about anarchist philosophy, and that's the Natural Ones. And if anybody wants to know my deep inner thoughts about that, can go listen to that podcast. It's also on Zombie Popcorn, so you can do that. So it just doesn't tell you anything about me personally. It just tells you that I don't believe in governments. I mean, because the true definition is just the absence of government. The applied definition is self-rule, self-authority. So I don't believe that I need a God to tell me what I should do. I don't believe I need a government to tell me what my morals are. I don't need anybody that I don't know to influence my thoughts, my passions, my loves, my hatreds. I can develop them on my own. I can develop them with my close community. I mean, that's how we do. So in that sense, as I've said 100 times before on this non-religious life, when it comes to my atheism, I don't go out in the street and say I'm an anarchist. I don't go on the street and say I'm an atheist, because again, I don't feel that it's necessary. I don't feel that me telling you that, me telling anyone that, even the listeners, adds any element of change of what we can do. So, like, for example, there's a homeless person who is dying of thirst on the sidewalk. Me walking up to him and saying, hey, I'm an anarchist atheist, or hey, I'm a Christian, or hey, I'm a Buddhist. He's going to look at you and go, I don't care, I'm thirsty. It doesn't solve the problem. Your personal philosophies, yes, helps build your worldview, but it's your actions that build who you are as an individual. So saying you're a Christian, saying you're an anarchist, saying you're an atheist does not tell anybody what that individual is.
I guess my one question with that, especially how it relates to how holding a worldview or propagating a worldview can be useful or effective. I mean, is it true to say that there are certain worldviews that might be harmful, like maybe one that, like an oppressive worldview?
Well, like we could look at the KKK, for example. They have and again, broad strokes, but they have a very negative, oppressive, very bad worldview. And does that mean they, as individuals, may not help the homeless? Does that mean that they do not do things that we would consider, even though we hate their worldview or disagree with their worldview? Does that mean that they as individuals, outside of their racism and their sexism and their homophobia, all that, outside of that, which those are horrible, horrible worldview things, but outside of that, does that make that individual lesser to do good deeds or good works or whatever, however you want to say it? You can have a perverse worldview, but have a good heart, a charitable heart. And the way that happens is because, again, it kind of goes in why I subscribe more to an anarchist worldview than I do a Republican, independent, or whatever political ideology that there is, because we do see how we are controlled by our environment. I do see how we are products of our environment. We are shaped and molded by the things that happen by the environment that we grow up in. The same thing that we talk about on this non-religious life. Bob and Ken always talk about is like, you're the religion that you grow up around. Whatever religious worldview that you grow up, you will 9 times out of 10 continue to be that worldview. So we are extremely influenced in current society by our environment. So going back to the worldview of the Klan, as horrible as it is, when you look at an individual, that there may be an individual in there that is kind and caring. They just have a very perverse worldview because of their environment. You can take them out of that environment and show them that people are not bad. Kind of doing like what we're doing on this show. We can show people that I, as an atheist, and you as a Christian, can sit down, look eye to eye, and kind of relate and kind of bond on this level. And though we may not agree with the methods, we may not agree with straight up value. I don't agree with that praying helps anything, but you do. But does that stop us from talking? No. I mean, it may cause a little battle between us on a small scale, may cause a small war between us in terms of philosophy, and you popping into my camera. But as the more we grow and more we talk, those little small values, even though we as individuals hold them as personal, do not interfere with our relationship. So you can take that Klan member out and change their environment and their personality and their hopefully, I mean, we're talking very broad strokes here, but the fact that our environment controls us, in a nutshell, if we truly understand our thoughts and truly understand our actions and truly understand why we do things and understand that we're doing them because of there are our choices and not choices because it was passed down through generations or because that we're being kind of conditioned into walking this way. Once we realize that we can make our own thoughts and our own opinions and our own actions outside of those pressures, then that's kind of the individual personal philosophy of what it is to be an anarchist.
Well, I guess then when you do activism, so let's say, I mean, we talked about, if you have someone with an oppressive worldview, you're trying to change their mind to make the world a better place. If they have something that's destructive in their worldview, what if it's just a matter of shocking the lackadaisical laissez-faire person who's just living their life in a capitalist society? They're maybe in the bit more in the upper class, and they're just nonchalant. They don't know about some of the injustices in the world because they're isolated by their own environment. Like, when you appeal to their moral sensibilities, what are you appealing from? What are you appealing to in them?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess trying to remember a good quote that I remember that I referred to back when I was way back in high school that really resonated with me at one time, that kind of deals with this, and for the life of me I can't remember the quote.
It'll be in the show notes.
It may be in the show notes, but for the life of me I can't remember. But it is the way. I mean, and again, I have to make this disclaimer. Just because I'm an anarchist and I believe this way, just probably the same way it is with Christians that they believe one way, the next Christian or the next anarchist that you talk to may not have even the remote same, views that I share.
You're not the spokesman for anarchy?
No, I'm not. You're the one in the front of the black. So, but so the way that I approach the world and the way that I approach issues and oppression and is not going out to seek it. It's not really saying I need to walk down the street and I know that you have oppressive views against women or whatever. I'm not going. I don't find myself walking up to strangers that I know have a different viewpoint than I do and have a desire to talk to them about them and why they should change. Because personally, as long as they're not being oppressive, they can have the worst views ever, and as long as they're not acting on them, I don't care. I mean, that's a part of being an individualist. You can have any thoughts you want. You can believe in anything that you want until it starts affecting somebody else. For example, it's like, let's say that we had a neighbor who, and I'm just going to be way extreme on this. Let's say that he talks about women in such a way that verbally is oppressive, and that he degrades them. He just thinks that they're lesser humans, and he's just very. He just has a bad view on it. And if I'm never in contact with him, but I know from third parties that he's this way, I'm probably not going to knock on his door and try to change his view. But if he's my neighbor and I hear him beating somebody or being physical or overly verbally abusive in a way that it is interfering with this individual's safety, or then I will take action, because I mean that's what it kind of means to be an activist. It's being active. Then that's kind of the way I work. If I see it and it's happening, I'll do something. If I hear third party about it, let's take for example human trafficking. I've not witnessed human trafficking, but I will do my best to get the information out there to the people who want to listen, and try to do what I can to change that. And it's such a broad picture, it's kind of hard to know, but I don't know. I'm rambling. So next question.
Well, I think we've I appreciate you sharing your views. I guess is the only follow-up I would say, in terms of changing people's thoughts. And by changing, I don't mean coercively. I mean through conversation, seeking to persuade people to have a more charitable, justice-oriented attitude. Where's the place for that conversation?
Where? What do you mean? Like,
how's that facilitated? How do you facilitate that? Like that?
I do podcasts.
Way ahead of you.
I don't know. I mean, it's every day. It's anytime you encounter that moment that needs to be addressed. I mean, you can ask anybody that I work with, but you're still not going to know. You can ask anybody I work with. Anytime there's something that I see that is wrong, my mouth is running. I'm putting my mouth and body and my entire presence there to either correct it or to stop it. I've done that for pretty much all the issues that I've worked for. I mean, I've been arrested for occupying a zoo. I've done everything from protests to civil disobedience to talking to people like this. I mean, I pretty much do whatever I think is necessary to be done. I mean, I have a strong belief that there's no wrong answer to reacting to something that's wrong. As long as you do something, that's the right thing to do. Anytime that you look at it and not do anything, that's the wrong action. It's like if you see somebody beating a dog or beating a child or abusing somebody, and you walk by going, well, there's nothing I can do about it, then that's the wrong step. Whether you're calling the cops, whether you're putting yourself in between the two people, whether you are trying to break them up, getting physical, whatever it is, as long as you're doing something right. And I guess the only way that you know what the right thing to do is you have to know what your beliefs are. You have to know why you make these choices. I mean, it's like, I'm not saying just because you see somebody being physically abusive to somebody, I'm not saying you have to go be Superman or Superwoman and jump in and get in the fight yourself. Especially if you're not comfortable to be in that environment, you should know what you should do. Call the cops, throw a rock at them. Get their attention, do something to stop it. So I mean,
all right. Well, we've talked a little bit before about. You keep talking about capitalism. Capitalism is not the answer. Capitalism is not the answer. Could you give us a working definition of your understanding? Hold it together.
I can't.
could you give us an example of your definition of capitalism? Did I say Calvinism? Capitalism.
Calvinism.
Wrong show. Capitalism, and what you see as being the problem with capitalism, and trying to use capitalism to help other people, and why it may even lead to oppression.
You just said use capitalism to help people, and how so you just took the full gauntlet. But capitalism, in my view, has never done anything to be used other than a form to oppress. It is just the way it's set up. I mean, a lot of I get in this argument a lot. Capitalism is not this beautiful thing of fair trade, free trade, and all this, where as long as you have the know-how and the motivation, you can become rich, and you can, having a job. It's not the way it works, because capitalism is controlled by corporations and government. And both corporations and government, the only purpose ever in the history of governments, the only purpose that governments has is to control. There is no other purpose of government. I mean, politics is that's what it's there. They put rules, regulations to control.
But before we go too far down that road, when we talk about control, I guess in that case, when it comes to government, how do you, if you have a lack of government, then what is the method, what is the social method by which you maybe punish wrongdoing? We could use...
Well, we can get that. Let me finish this here, because the frame of government and the frame of capitalism is as perverse and twisted, and we are conditioned to believe one thing, as when people think that anarchists are nothing but mad Unabombers who go around throwing Molotov cocktails at police stations, because none of that's true. We've been conditioned to, if you just look at our government, you can look at any government, but we've been conditioned from day one of patriotism. We grew up singing the Pledge of Allegiance. These are just trivial little things, but we're constantly. So we have to have pride in it. We have so many people in this country, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing not to have pride, not to have patriotism, but I'm just saying, but when it gets to the point when people don't understand the fundamental issues of the government, when they don't understand things that will help people, and if it goes against what their view of American is, they're like, America's number one, get out of here, love it or leave it. When we have such a broad scale of that, there's something wrong. It's blind faith is what it is, and a blind faith in a government that its only purpose is to control. Yes, and I know there's people going, well, having control is good, because without the government we wouldn't have stop signs, stop lights. People be running into each other and having wrecks and running people over because nobody. It's really, really surprises me that people think if somebody else is not making choices for you, that you can't do them yourself. Do you really think that we would drive down the street, or that we would be in an environment where if there wasn't a stop sign, if there wasn't a stoplight, that we would still injure each other, that we would intentionally forget common sense and preserve ourselves and go in and run down people?
I guess my only response to that would be, if you visit any developing country that lacks an infrastructure and has a more corrupt government, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And fewer utilized resources. A lot of them have resources; they're just utilized and or controlled by corporations, international corporations. But there's still the idea of that infrastructure.
But that infrastructure is, even in the developing countries, that infrastructure is being built for one reason. And what reason is that?
To control?
When we have corporations going into third world countries, going to underdeveloped countries, why are they there? Their interest is not to, hey, let's make these poor people better and happy and have water and running baths. Let's get them to a level so they can stay healthy, so they can work for us. I mean, look at Panasonic in Central America. You know, we talked about this before. I mean, we have the working poor. We have people who live in the worst conditions that build products for Panasonic. We have, you know, we talk about it all the time with the iPad and stuff. We have people living in subpar conditions so they can build products for us. Apple, Panasonic, these corporations go into these countries not for the benefit of those people, but for the benefit of their own pockets. It's cheap labor. The purpose of governments and corporations is to control. Corporations, the purpose of that is to make products, but having those products made at the least value that they can, so they can, whether it's free labor or very, very cheap labor. Because if labor was, if they cared about people, and if they cared about paying fair wages, giving fair living, then they would keep their factories here. They would keep their, or go into the developing countries and build responsible factories for people to work in, and for people to. Anyway, go ahead and wish them.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I guess the argument could be made, and it's probably true, at least in part, that one of the reasons the first world, or whatever you want to call it, the Western world, the developed world wants to develop those countries, is in part to make them safer and more structured, and in order to come in, run businesses so they can use the resources there. Yeah. So that's a good point. So
it's not to help these people. And I always make a joke about it, and I made a joke about it on This Non-Religious Life. I was like, I always find it funny that in these, that there are three things that you'll find in developing countries. You'll see outside governments trying to get in there to get their resources. You'll see corporations that are tied in with those third-party governments trying to get their resources, and then you'll have Christians in there to condition them to follow a belief that is considered a Western view, so they can get in there to control. The third part I just joke about because it's funny, because you do see Christians in every third world, you know.
It's true. And
I just think it's funny. So don't take it personal. That was a joke, that last part. So.
With some grain of truth. See, I can say that. Those are my people.
So, I mean, and here's where it gets, where I get upset about the discussion about third world countries and how bad developing countries have it because of corporations, government going in there to try to use them as resources. We've turned a blind eye to our own country. We don't talk about the things that happen in this country. I mean, you were shocked to find out, as much as I was, that there is no minimum age limit to work in the fields of America agribusiness. The agriculture is out in the field. We, you, me, churches, governments, human rights groups, everyone is 100% against child labor. We spend and send money off everywhere to say, no, if you're telling third world countries, developing countries, then like if you're using child, we're doing it with the cacao, with the chocolate. So if you have children in your field, it's wrong. You cannot do this. You need to reform. But the fact is that here in the United States, if you're a child, you can work in the field picking strawberries, picking tomatoes, and there's no overtime limits. There is no vacation, and it's very, very low wage. And I don't understand why there's not a bigger outcry about it. I mean, we are supposed to have these values, but it just seems like we continue to point outside of our borders, and we never point at ourselves. And I've not understood why that happens. And this goes back to solidify my idea that governments and corporations are only here. Governments are here to control. Corporations are here to make the most money by using the most resources by paying the less money. And the fact that we're in 2012 and there are no laws protecting children that are picking our crop. I mean, there's a documentary. You can go to theharvestfilm.com and watch the trailer. There's a kid in there. I think he's 16, if I remember correctly. He talks about how he's working in the field and they spray the toxic chemicals, the pesticides, while they're in the fields working. And it got so bad his skin started to fall off. This is not Honduras. This is not Africa. This is not India. This is United States. This is Maryland. This is Florida. This is Arizona. And nobody's doing anything about it. And to tie it into my anarchist belief, I've never seen in the history of corporations and government where the overall purpose of them has been good. It's always been to make money and to control. You know, people always make a joke about 1984 and how we were becoming that. I don't think we are to that level, because I think we're more savvy in terms of our politicians and the corporations of what they can do to keep it out of the public eye. But I do think we are at and continuing to approach critical level of where the divide between the poor and the rich is going to be so wide that the poor will be treated, and they are currently being treated as what we view as what's happening in third world and underdeveloped countries. It's sad, and we got to do something about it.
So it's not 1984 so much as it's Brave New World.
Yeah. Good correction. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, according to the statistics, that there's more than 400,000 children in America who work in the fields to harvest the food that we eat. That's everything from strawberries to onions to potatoes to tomatoes to anything that's grown in the States. There's 400,000 children in the field doing that, and it's really fucked up. Next question.
Well, I guess going back to the issue of capitalism, you know, some people are going to hear that and they'll have a hard time getting on board because the narrative is that capitalism, like you said, you know, it's about private, personal ownership of things, being able to start from the ground. I mean, so I guess a follow-up question would be, what's the alternative? I guess the first question would be, I mean, are you against personal, private ownership of things, or? Well,
personal, private ownership of things, really, I've mentioned in our notes. I don't feel that is a conversation that's relevant to this topic, and it's not. It's because the reason
Here's why I think it might be.
Well, I'm just saying it because that is such a large discussion that is we could take up 2 hours just talking about how that would function, about how a society. But in short, going back to that world of conditioning, to reevaluate, and you know, it's not really utopian. But anyway, ask your questions.
Well, I was going to say, here's why I think it's relevant, because it'll be relevant especially for people coming from this side of the table, because they associate Christianity with conservative politics, a lot of them to almost an unhealthy extent. You want to talk about being conditioned to be patriotic, be raised in a Christian Baptist school or go to a Christian Baptist school when you're younger, and that'll definitely, I mean, you'll think that America's the new Israel, which it's not. So I mean,
but that's what I said, like in the first show. I mean, even in this one, when I made the joke about in developing countries you have governments, corporations, and Christians, and I think that does play a part. I mean, I made a joke about it in the first show, and I'm sorry to bring it up again because I know you don't want to talk about it, but the fact that Regent University gives tours of the Pentagon and Homeland Security and nowhere else in our other branches of the government that they promote, that they go on these tours on their website, kind of says something.
They do have a government school.
Huh?
They do have a government school. Like, there is a
public
policy.
You can have a government school and take people on tour of other parts, but these are the military branches of government. These are not just, you know, oh, we're going to the Senate to watch something, you know, we're going to the chambers or whatever. We're going to the heart of the military complex in the United States. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist or anything, but that's weird. I mean, especially when what I've been taught, because, you know, I grew up in that Christian world and I followed that Christian path. That is not the element that we are supposed to embrace I mean, it's great to have knowledge. I'm not saying people should not know how the industrial military complex works. But when you're giving high school students or potential Regent University students a tour of the military industrial complex, it's kind of weird. And when that's like a prominent thing on the website, there's no other government tours that you offer on the website other than the military industrial complex. There's a little bit of control thing going on.
Well, and we could get into that.
But I know you...
I'd be happy to address some thoughts on it. Maybe, perhaps, in another podcast, only because I did want to follow up about the capitalism thing. That's not me dodging the question. I actually do want to address it.
Everybody.
No, I did want to, because I think you gave a good description of what you're talking about in terms of capitalism when you used the example of the glass of water. Could you give us that example
if I can
now?
remember what I said.
If there's a person who's thirsty.
Oh yes, well, capitalism. I guess the way it works now, and as I mentioned earlier, that the way capitalism works now is like we can use free labor, debt bondage, whatever slavery that you want to pick to produce a product. We can pay them 25 cents a week or not pay them at all. And that happens. That has been documented time and time again. It's happening right now for 99% of the products that we consume, whether it's clothing, electronics, whatever. That is happening. That is a real world fact. So companies can exploit people to create a product at the lowest cost possible to create the product, and then sell it for what they can get for it, not what the product is worth. And that's the downfall of our teachings, and why I think the greed aspect sets into our thinking, why we think capitalism is good, because we're like, well, I can grow this. I mean, let me take it to a personal level. Let's say I grow a tomato plant. You know, I have a tomato plant. I'm growing tomatoes. And I say, well, I'm only going to eat 5 of these tomatoes, and that will supply my family for a month. But I have 15 other tomatoes left. I said, well, I can. This is the thought that people have now. Well, I can sell those 15 tomatoes and make profit and plant more, and we can and it'd be great, and everything's happy about it. But that's not the way it works. I mean, there's people who are suffer because of it. And I think the analogy that I made, if I remember correctly, was that the system should be set up in a way that you pay for not what you think you can get from the product, but what the product is actually worth. And then I guess the analogy would be with that is like you have a man dying of thirst, and you have a glass of water. And the current state of capitalism, how much is that glass of water worth to that individual who's dying of thirst? He would give everything. He would give his house, give the clothes off his back, give every bit of money that he has, his future monies, his kids' earnings, to not die. But any reasonable, passionate person wouldn't do that. They would give the water for free, because his life has more worth than what you could possibly get from it. And that's the idea that we should build out. If you want to embrace capitalism, then that's the definition of capitalism that you should embrace, is sell a product for what it's worth, not what you think you can get from it. Use compassion, use common sense. Don't be greedy. And I think that's why people do embrace that, because people, from day one, we were taught we have to make money, we have to become successful, and to be successful you have to be rich, or at least well off.
It's up to each person to.
It's up to each. Yeah, I mean, look how bad it is. Let's take Central America. Let's look at the migrant farmers here in America right now that are held in debt bondage, that are being chained to tractors at night so they don't run away from the farm. Let's look at them. The way these individuals get caught up in this is their culture, and it's very similar to our culture as in terms of the way we're taught, is we have to become successful. We have to be successful. We have to become something. And it's up to us as individuals to make that happen. If you do not become successful, if you fail, if you're not rich or well off, there's only one person to blame. And you know who that person is? It's not God. It's not anybody else but yourself. It is only you to blame that you're not successful. And this is taught from birth, and it's passed on generation to generation and generations. And with the migrant workers, they are trying to get money to feed their family. They are trying to get money to send it back home to their family. And because they have this pride in that I can do something, I can provide for my family, I can provide and may not be rich, but I can provide something for them, they accept offers from these tomato farmers and the cucumber farmers or whatever farmer it is, because they make wonderful sounding offers. They're saying like, well, yeah, if you come over and work on my farm, we'll pay you X amount of dollars, we'll give you a place to live, you'll have meals, you know, it'd be great, and you can send the money back home to your family, you can do whatever you want with it, you just come work on my farm. And they're like, great. And we talked about it when we had Beth on this show. It's like that they'll work, and come payday they're set down you know, with the check and say, okay, here's your money, but since we brought you over, you owe us this for this. Since you we gave you a place to live, you owe us this, even though they may be living on the floor, may live, you know, sleeping in a room with 16 other people. That is not good accommodations. We'll charge you for a room. Oh, we fed you too, so, you know, food costs this times this many meals times this many weeks. We have to take that from them. Oh, so by the time it's over, you either have no money, you have very little money, and there's like, well, you still owe us, so, you know, we'll garnish your next check. That individual doesn't think that he's in debt bondage. That individual does not think that he's being tricked, that he's being forced to work for no wages. He thinks he just got himself into a bad situation, and the only person that can get him out of this bad situation so he can move on to provide for his family is himself. There's no one else that he feels that he can get, even that he can get out of that situation. So the cycle continues and continues, and men who use the capitalistic system, corporations who take advantage of this, take advantage of people. They take advantage, and this is where we were talking about the hierarchy of needs, of how it's been used against people to put them in debt bondage, to put them in slavery, and that's the examples how it works. And it's I went on a rant. I don't even remember what your question was, but the purpose is that form of capitalism does not work, and you need to take a product, and if you must sell things, which we do, we love to make things. We're creative people. We love to make things and trade for it and whatever, but charge what it costs to make it, what the product is actually worth, not what you can get from it. Don't take advantage of your fellow person because of it.
How does that affect something like fair trade?
Well, fair trade, that's again, fair trade. If let's look, when fair trade first started out, it started off just with coffee. It had no other stamp on any other food. Corporations saw that this is, well, let me back up. Let's use an example, just kind of so I can build on this. As anybody who knows me or anybody listening to this show, I'm vegan. I don't eat meat. I'm an animal rights activist, a human rights activist, environmental activist. So I don't consume animal products, but I do read the agribusiness newsletters and have their newspapers and stuff. But I just want to point out that someone's wife just gave me goat soap. But what did she tell you? Somebody gave it to us.
Somebody gave it as a gift.
We were giving it to somebody who uses it. So
they should have burned it.
Way to trivialize the issue there, Christian. Anyway, so I do read the publications of the meat industry, and I don't know if you would remember, but you know when you look at steaks and hamburger meat and just any meat product that you find in the grocery store, and it has that little quality check on there. Well, they had in one of their industries the history behind the quality check, and the quality check was done by a marketing firm. They put it on products, and they said that in a test study of the same product, the same meat product in the same grocery store, the product that has the check on it sold more than the product that didn't, even though the check means nothing. People just associate, oh, well, it's good, it's been tested or whatever, and it actually means nothing. So to relate it to fair trade, is fair trade started off with good intentions, and it still is a good intention, and there are still groups and individuals and farms out there that are doing the right thing. But there are other corporations, Nestle, Hershey's, the majors, who decided that it would be a good marketing aspect. And so and there's documentary proof showing that farms like Nestle, Hershey's, and all of them that claim to be fair trade, that claim to not have child labor on their farms, and that use the fair trade stamp, have slaves on their farms they don't live up to the guidelines, because the country is corrupted, and they make a lot of money off of the cacao, because I think it's 97% of all chocolate is grown in Africa, because the labor is cheap. Again, proving that corporations are not ethical when it comes to producing their products. So you and it goes back to that, you have to know what you're buying, you have to know what you're consuming, and you can't rely on governments to tell you. I mean, the governments, we had 4 senators along with Nestle, Hershey's, and I forget the Cadbury, I think it may be. I mean, it may not have that last one right. But they got together back in 2010 and said, what we're going to do is we're going to eradicate child slavery in the cacao fields in Africa. And so we signed these papers, we'll create this stamp, and we'll put it on all of our products. Not one piece of legislation has been drafted, has been even passed. There hasn't been anything from these publicity stunt that they pulled to say that we're going to eradicate child slavery in 10 years. They did it. They signed this paper in 2010. Nothing has been done. There's been no pressure from the outside other than small groups trying to pressure to get the eradication of child labor in the cacao farms. It's all publicity stunts. It's all to get reelected. It's all to get... There's no ethical bone in these companies. With that said, there are companies out there, like I mentioned last week, Divine, who are actually engaging into making sure that when they do make a mistake, when there are mistakes on the farms made, that they are corrected quickly and that they never happen again.
Which I know we talked to, that we said this fair trade started off with coffee.
Yeah.
And I think you told me that coffee is the one thing that if you see it says fair trade, coffee's for the most part, is the one thing you can rely on more than
I would say
others.
You can feel comfortable with it. I can't say 100% across the board, because there are more issues than just stamping, because they had to pay to have that stamp on there. There could be governmental changes that changes farms, in areas that causes a shift. I mean, it's the best thing to do is just to contact the company themselves, talk to them. Hopefully that they're going to be honest and responsive. A lot of them aren't. And that's why there's a campaign right now against Cliff Bar, because they refuse to let people know if their chocolate comes from Africa or if it comes from Central America. They refuse to answer the question, and which would lead any rational person to think they're kind of hiding something. And corporations don't have to answer to you. They don't. I mean, it's nice that they do. It's nice that Divine is actually trying to be ethical about it. It's good that, like Newman's and other that they're trying to do something. And going back to the you mentioned about becoming privatized, and there's within the Tea Party movement and the Republican Party, they're trying to privatize everything. And being an anarchist, I will side on the government on this issue, because anytime you privatize anything, it doesn't matter if it starts off privatized or if it's a government function that becomes privatized, it's a bad thing. And the reason it's a bad thing is because when a government controls something, it's like, the talk right now is that, it's BS talk, but for example, privatizing schools, which is happening in Louisiana and across the country, the privatizing school is a bad thing, because when schools are in the government realm, when you have to have elected officials in this area, in the government area, then you have a voice. You can change if something's going on in the school district and you don't like it. You have the voice and the power to change it. When a private company is doing something that you do not agree with, you don't have any power. You don't have any rights to them. They don't have to listen to you.
It's actually funny you say that, because I remember when I was reading Language of God and reading about Francis Collins and his mapping of the human genome, he said that one of the problems they had was there was talk about cutting their public funding in order to fund private industries and have a private industry map the genome. And he's like, the biggest problem with that and the disaster that would have caused would have been, one, the genome then could have potentially been copyrighted or owned by a company and not in the public domain. And then two, they might have cut corners because it would have been about, the money would have been driving it. And it's the same thing that happens when you have for-profit universities. Like, the money can drive the product and not necessarily the education itself. So it's actually, that's actually funny you bring that up about education, because I think it can kind of go the same way too. And I think the genome is a good example of that. And now we have a quality genome mapping. We have a quality genome map now, as opposed to something that could have been lesser.
Well, it's like also, if you want to talk about human cloning, we as a government, along with other members of the UN, signed that we would not clone humans or do anything genetic modifying with humans. But it took a private corporation, a private university, to actually give birth to 3 genetically modified humans. Who are they going to answer to? They don't have to answer to anybody, especially since the government and corporations and private sector work together. Because the politicians were once CEOs of these companies, or will become CEOs when they are no longer reelectable, and the money crosses hands all the time. Like, you look at the bank systems. It's like people are like, yeah, let's find these banks. Let's charge these banks all these penalties. But what is, when we fine a bank, when we charge a bank a penalty, where does that money go? To the bank. Because they hold all the money. Oh, slap my hand. This bank has to pay $1 million. Okay, who do I pay it to? Pay it to the government. Who owns the government's money? The bank. It's so inbred, and it's.
But at some point, like, a couple of things are happening here, because within, we can talk about corporations and governments, and this isn't me saying that corporations are people, and that's not what I'm saying. But at the same time, they are made up of people, and there are people involved. So it's not just, the corporation isn't this separate non-human entity. Like, we're talking about people who are making decisions in government and in corporations. So I guess at some point, if we're going to say that, is that just because people in government and in corporations have been conditioned that they do things that are oppressive? Where's that? I guess for me, the question is, like, how do you address that oppressive behavior? Is it an oppressive nature within those people, or what's?
If we knew the answer, then we could end oppression. Simple as that. If we knew the answer to that, but you have to look at the desire of greed. Again, it's not inherent in us. It's not an inherent quality. It's not something that we were born with, to want to oppress people, to want to dominate in such a way that when when we know for a fact, and corporations know for a fact, that these people are living 25 people deep in a very small room, that they're cooking, eating, sleeping, and showering in that same room, sharing with these 25 people with very little water quality, with very little pay. Corporations know this. They know this is happening. And, you know, you say that people are made, that corporations are made up of people and individuals, which is true. I'm trying to think of a good example. It's like, say if we have, let's just say you and I both worked at Nestle or Hershey's. Say we were pretty high up, not CEO, not president, but say, you know, we were up higher than, you know, factory workers,
junior executives.
Yeah, whatever. Whatever. We were not. We're not the working poor. We're not struggling. We have our health care. We have, you know, we can take our girlfriends and our wives, you know, to fancy dinners. We have nice cars, nice houses. You know, we're living all right. And we know what's going on in the fields in Africa, in the Ivory Coast. We know. We've seen the documentaries. We've seen the protests. We know what's going on. There's something in people, and I don't blame them for it, because it's a hard choice to make. It's a hard choice to say, I know my company's doing this. Do I protest it and be jobless? Put me and my wife and my children, possibly homeless, possibly, you know, for even if it's a short amount of time, in the poverty level until we can find a better job. If I can find a better job for speaking out against this, against, you know, my CEO, going public about it, will other companies that are doing the same thing that I'm not aware of hire me because they know that I'm a loose cannon? What do you do? What do you? That's the choices you have. It's almost the same choices that they are putting the migrant worker families in. The guy that we talked about earlier, where he's just trying to raise money for his family, but he got himself in a bad situation, and he has to get himself out of it. But he will never get himself out of it because the system's worked against him. What are we going to do? We have this great job. Do we just quit silently and go find another job? And if we do that, what will that do? What would that do to the company? They'll just find a replacement. They'll hire somebody else. Nothing changes. What if we decide together that, you know, like during lunch one day we talk about this and we're like, yeah, this is kind of messed up. Let's do something about it. Do you make that choice? Do you put your family in jeopardy? And because seriously, these companies are so tight. In that video that I put up on the Facebook, if you go in, for example, go into JCPenney's, like the video shows, apply for their credit card and buy a suit with that credit card, and then when you get the bill, you rip the bill up and never pay for the suit, so you have a free suit. And then you go to Sears, apply for their credit card, but when you do that, they deny you the credit card. Why do they deny you? Because corporations have learned that it's in both of their best interest to report the thieves, to report the people who are taking advantage of the system. If we rose up and protested the company and got fired on because of our voice, yeah, we'll get 5 minutes on the news on it. Woohoo. I mean, it does get the message out there, but in the overall picture of it, can I get another job at the same pay level? Is that important to me? What do you do? I mean, that's...
Yeah.
Seriously, I'm asking you a question. What would you do?
Well, the fighter in me would really love to get fired and maybe not get 5 minutes on the news, but to take a stand and to if I was in a place where I knew I was morally in the right, I would hope that in that moment I'd take the stand. And
even if you had a newborn child at home in your mother's arm, in your wife's arms, do you still take the stand? and I'm not saying this to be extreme. These are real life situations.
No, you're right.
That's why this stuff continues, and that's why the greed continues, because it's the same methods that are being used against the migrant workers, the same methods that are being used against the cacao farmers, the same methods that are being used to oppress people are not just the working poor that are being it. We are wage slaves in terms of we have to worry about where our next meal comes from, where, you know, our standard of living is upheld. I know it may seem very trivial and very privileged class to say, oh, well, you know, I'm going to lose, you know, $100,000 a year job for speaking my voice to help people who have nothing. But it's the issue of, I mean, if we were single, there's only one answer. There's only one answer. If we didn't have that the family responsibility, we as individuals know the one answer is to bring that company down. But when there's other people, it's hard. That's enough of that rant.
That's where you hope you have a community around you who will support you and who stands with you too.
That's easier said than done. I've been an activist since I was 16, maybe even younger. I mean, if you talk to my mom, I was an activist when I was 5, but because I protested. But anyway, it's hard to build that community. It is very hard to build that community. Even, I mean, let's talk about Christian community. I'm not talking about just the activist community. Do you think that you would have a large support saying, look, I'm about to go up against this company. I'm about to put my family at risk. I'm going to need financial support. I'm going to need emotional support. I'm going to need this so we can push through. Even if you had the perfect plan of action to put, how many people of your friends, your church community would actually stand behind you and see you from beginning to end? Honestly, how many people right now you don't have to name names, just do you think it could be possible?
I think it could be, and I do have certain people beyond my parents. My parents, I mean,
yeah.
are
my parents are always will support you no matter what.
I have one community of people I know of in particular who I believe would.
Okay. With the follow up to that question, how come you're not doing it? You have the community. What's holding you back from doing it? You're not going to risk losing a job. If you have a community that will support you in taking on these oppressive organizations, these oppressive corporations, these oppressive situations, why aren't you doing it? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to make a point that that's why it's important for us to do this show. Why it's not important to say I'm an anarchist because of this. I'm a Christian because of this. The important question is, why aren't you doing it? My philosophy of the world and your philosophy of the world are way polar opposites. But when it comes to helping people, we are side by side. So why aren't we doing it? And with that said, we are out of time. So I want y'all to think about it. Seriously. I mean, because shit's fucked up. To put it
No, that was
nicely.
Good. That was good. That was good.
So let us know what you think. All of our contact information, phone number, even if you want to call in, we'll play your message. It's on zombiepopcorn.com. Email is there. Our contact page is there. So let us know what you think. We would love to hear from you. If you want to be on the show, we'll figure something out and make it work. So thanks for spending this hour with us. Do you have any last words?
The video. Oh, yeah.
theharvestfilm.com. Go check it out. That's about the American children work. The American migrant children workers here in
America.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I'm not going to
here in the United States. And is this okay if I do the audiobook?
Yeah, go ahead.
The audiobook that I'm going to recommend this week, there are actually a lot of great books I would love to recommend, and unfortunately they, like last week, the two we both did weren't on.
I claimed that mine didn't.
Mine, Surprised by Hope, is not on Audible, but the Good News About Injustice by Gary Hogan, the founder of International Justice Mission, is. So that would be the book I would recommend. And yeah.
Thank you. Have a good night.